Okay, so I want to start this video off with a question. Have you, you the viewer, ever had something, anything at all that you really liked? Something that you could preach the good word of for days, yet nobody knew about? I know that I have for certain, and I definitely don't keep that a secret. But if your answer is yes, then stick around because I'm gonna give you one more thing to feel that way about. Enter Kemono Jihen. This anime was something that was ridiculously overshadowed by the insane amount of series that came out of winter season 2021. I watched it around the time it came out and planned on talking about it here on the channel ever since, but a certain video I've been working myself to the bone on had something completely different to say about that. Despite that, I've managed to set aside a little time for myself, and what better way to spend it than working on another video. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna kill myself. But anyways, let's just get right into it, shall we? Kemono Jihen is a supernatural manga series, go figure, written and illustrated by Shō Aimoto, serialized in Jump Square magazine since December of 2016, and as of the writing of this script has built up upon itself with a total of 17 volumes and 69 chapters. And of course, it would go on to receive an anime adaptation like I mentioned before, which is mainly what we'll be talking about in this video, seeing as I've only seen the first season of the anime. But I will touch on the manga and some departments for anyone interested in that instead. By the way, there's going to be some spoilers for the first episode, so if you'd like, feel free to go watch it and come back, or whatever you'd like to do. Either way, I assure you the experience will be great. The anime was produced by Ajiado Animation Works, most known for the series How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, and when I say most known, I mean it wholeheartedly. I literally haven't heard of anything else on this list, and so haven't you probably, and no, this doesn't count because it's just some weird spin-off. The studio is, however, coming out with a new series called Revenger, which looks pretty cool, but I digress. They released the first episode of Kemono Jihen on January 10th, 2021, which honestly couldn't have been a worse time to release it. I talked briefly about how its release date played a big part in the lack of attention it got, but just to really put into perspective how screwed it was simply based on its release date, around the same time we got releases such as Attack on Titan Final Season Part 1, Dr. Stone The Stone Wars, Mushoku Tensei, ReZero Season 2 Part 2, and Reincarnated as a Slime, all of which won a category in the Anime of the Year awards that year, not even mentioning incredible anime from all the other seasons. So yeah, this anime had it rough to put it lightly. But we start out with a young boy, our main character Dorotabo, nicknamed as such due to his odor gained from countless hours of fieldwork day in and day out. It happens to be the name of a yokai or supernatural entity of Japanese folklore, who similarly is known to live in the mud of rice fields, adding to the name's demeaning nature. He was taken in by an innkeeper and her son who treat Dorotabo very poorly and hold him in an incredibly low regard. As he handles his usual odd jobs, Yatoro, the son of the innkeeper, comes into view with his friends who all seem to be walking home from school. They make short mention of a person from Tokyo who is planning to drop by their residence in the countryside before taking advantage of the situation to poke fun at Dorotabo. Yatoro shouts to him while he works, telling him that he should stay there so that the visitor doesn't tear his own nose off from dealing with his smell. With the way he responds to this situation, a simple "okay, be careful," it's quickly established that our main character has a very no-nonsense personality, not taking the harsh treatment that he receives to heart and simply living by the book. We then sweep over to Yatoro's mother, who converses with a mysterious man about strange occurrences that have been happening around the vicinity of their village. A stench of dead bodies linger in an area where animals had previously roamed freely and in abundant numbers, with it now being an especially barren venue, an occurrence that clearly couldn't be the work of any ordinary person, or a person at all. She continues on saying that everyone has been beyond uneasy concerning the situation, but efforts have been made to keep things secret from the children. It's more than apparent that letting the news slip to the kids would mean them potentially getting too worried to attend school, or worse. The mystery man reassures Yatoro's mother that as a detective he'll take care of the problem, and that everything will be kept under wraps so as to not incite any more worry than necessary. They head to the inn where the man has his first encounter with Dorotabo. He asks him how he's doing but gets no answer, and begins to wonder what a child is doing during the middle of a weekday, working in the fields instead of being at school. The innkeeper plans to explain the situation more in detail when they return to the inn, but he ends up going to Yatoro about it instead. Being her blood son, Yatoro naturally gets to deal with the less strenuous and laborious tests of the lives they live, and so he's tasked with being at the man's aid. If it wasn't already apparent by his out-of-place presence and Dorotabo's demeanor during their encounter, Yatoro's glowing complexion and conversation with this man confirms that he is the esteemed guest from Tokyo that was briefly spoken of by the children at the start of the episode and/or chapter, and it becomes clear that Dorotabo's earlier reaction to the man was in response to Yatoro's direction to not interact with him, so as to not bother him. As the two continue talking, the detective asks about the other kid who he saw working hard in the fields upon upon his arrival, which Yatoro then goes into detail about. He then explains that the nickname they call him by is Dorotabo, and clarifies the reasoning for his name, further poking fun at him by saying that he smelled bad ever since his birth, and as such was given jobs where he wouldn't need to be around anyone. Our detective grows even more interested in him through this conversation, and goes on to ask the innkeeper for Dorotabo's aid rather than her son Yatoro's. This confuses everyone equally, but she goes through with the request regardless. Dorotabo worries about his inexperience concerning the more delicate tasks of the inn, questioning the innkeeper what exactly it is he should do, but the innkeeper leaves him to his own devices, simply instructing him to get freshened up and figure out the rest on his own. After washing up and donning a fresh set of clothes, he reports to the detective to serve him his breakfast and quickly excuses himself. But before Dorotabo can leave, the man tells him that he's been wanting to see him since yesterday and asks him if he remembers him. After Dorotabo says yes, the detective introduces himself to our main character by handing over his business card, which reads Kohachi Inugami of the Inugami Strangeness Counseling Office. He discloses that he's a detective who specializes in the occult and has come to their rural village to look into what has been going on. For Inugami, any lead to figuring things out would be greatly appreciated, and as someone who works in the fields all day, he figures that Dorotabo may have caught on to a thing or two. His intuition proves correct, and Dorotabo agrees to share his info, then asking Inugami if it happens to be rotting animal bodies that he's looking into. This slightly throws Inugami off, as he recalls the owner of the inn saying that no one has told the children, but as it happens, and with little to no surprise with how he's treated, Dorotabo is the one who is unfortunately tasked with getting rid of the dead bodies. As he's noticed, there have been 6 corpses so far, which have mostly belonged to chickens, all of which had their insides eaten. He compares it to the work of monsters if they really existed. He also makes it clear that he's the only one who knows, for if he told anyone, he'd grow even more shunned and hated than he already is. The final piece of info that he relays to Inugami is the frequency of which this occurrence has been happening. Every morning after a new moon is when he's had to deal with the new bodies, so he predicts that something may happen on the next new moon, which is 5 days from the current point in time. Inugami thanks Dorotabo for all the info he's given him, and over the next few days, the two grow even more acquainted, to the owner's surprise. And of course, this doesn't sit very well with Yatoro. Inugami spends day in and day out with Dorotabo, accompanying him and assisting him with his typical outside work. Eventually, our detective asks Dorotabo about a sort of stone pendant that he's been wearing around his neck, and he replies by saying that he's had it ever since he was a baby, an item which was probably given to him by his parents who abandoned him. Inugami asks to see it for a moment, and upon closer inspection, realizes that it's a stone called a life stone or life calculus in the manga, only formed under specific conditions and bearing incredible value, insinuating that it isn't the sort of thing that anyone would just leave with a child they plan to give up, telling Dorotabo quite frankly that he wasn't abandoned. He even offers him a chance to meet them, and he's fairly confident that he can locate them with his detective skills. As something that's never crossed his mind, Dorotabo finds himself conflicted with this decision, but Inugami understands this and leaves him to decide what he wants. The night of the new moon comes to pass, and Dorotabo waits for Inugami outside, where he encounters a jealous Yatoro. Yatoro begins to antagonize him, questioning if he was doing what he was as a form of revenge, telling him awful things such as how he should know his place as someone who's only there because he's a cousin, and that his parents gave him away. But for the first time, possibly as a result of the time he spent with Inugami, he doesn't just sit down and take Yatoro's slander. He replies with his usual straightforward tone, but this time his reply is something much more meaningful. I wasn't abandoned. This greatly angers Yatoro, leading him to forcibly trying to take Dorotabo's lifestone, but he's met with a punch to the face, knocking him clean to the ground. In pain, he looks up to witness a terrifying sight. A transformed monster like Dorotabo. He runs away and Dorotabo's transformation fades, and we cut to Inugami, who comes across him in a dejected state. He tells Inugami that he's the monster, recalling how the animals' bodies looked similar to the peach that he had been eating while he was waiting for Inugami. Then, with possibly the worst timing imaginable, Inugami tells Dorotabo that he is going to show him his butt. But wait, I promise it's not what it seems like. Upon partially lifting down his pants and revealing his backside, a tail is seen stemming from his lower back. He then explains that since ancient times, beings called Kemono have been living among humans without them knowing, and that as of recently, they've become a lot more involved with humans than they should, even going as far as having children with them. And Inugami reveals to Dorotabo that he is the child of a bloodless demon called a ghoul and a human. In other words, a hybrid. But he reassures Dorotabo, revealing that he is not a human either, but a Bakedanuki Kemono, showcasing his ability to manifest a gun out of nothing straight from his body. And finally, he tells Dorotabo that the lifestone he's been wearing around his neck, given to him by his parents, acts as a shield which suppresses the natural violence and thirst of a Kemono, preventing them from instinctively attacking humans and such. This means that Dorotabo is no threat since he's constantly been wearing the lifestone. and so by extension, he couldn't have been the one who killed all the animals, and there must be another ghoul roaming about. This still worries him, however, recalling how Yatoro rushed off into the dark of night by himself, with the threat still possibly lingering about. Yatoro, in panic from what he witnessed of Dorotabo, continues running without direction, and encounters two ghastly-looking dog-like ghoul Kemono. But luckily, Inugami and Dorotabo manage to catch up with him and quickly dispatch of the monsters. Things seem like they're taken care of, however, one more remains, and it's much larger than the others were. From just its presence, we can comfortably assume that this is the monster that has been leaving rotting carcasses behind so often, and the two begin to engage in battle with it. With the help of Inugami's instruction, Dorotabo manages to bring the beast down with relative ease, and they begin to make their way back to the inn. On the way back, Dorotabo begins to question what he'll do. As it's clear with everything that's happened, including Yatoro now knowing what he is, he can't stay with them any longer, in fear of his secret being revealed. After hearing this and agreeing with him, Inugami proclaims that he's thought of a really good idea, and unexpectedly, trains a gun on Dorotabo. He reveals that his true reason for coming to the countryside village was to kill him, on the innkeeper's order. She had already known what Dorotabo was, and she was told by her sister when she left him in her care. It was kept a secret ever since, but these incidents had led her to believe that he was the one causing all the trouble, and she decided to have him killed in secret. Inugami claims that everything worked out pretty smoothly. After all, Dorotabo wasn't the one committing the act, and considering Yatoro's nature to mouth off, in the end, nobody would believe Dorotabo if he tried to convince them otherwise. Despite how bad things look for him, he's understanding of the situation and accepts his fate. Before Inugami pulls the trigger, however, he asks Dorotabo two final questions, the first being what his real name is. And the boy replies, Kabane. Inugami then asks him one last time if he would like to meet his parents, and Kabane again rejects the offer and asks him for death. Inugami accepts this request. And then, well, I'll let you see for yourself what happens next. But if there's anything that I'm to tease, it's that while someone's journey will end here, it definitely won't be Kabane's. Take that as you will. But by now, I'm sure I have you wanting to continue, right? After all, even while it's deeply rooted within the supernatural genre, it still blends other aspects like mystery, action, thriller, and drama very well. As far as supernatural series go, this was a pretty standard first episode/chapter, but it definitely has its shining moments, as I'm sure you can tell. One of the biggest things that always helps when creating a story is having a strong start, one that hooks the viewer, and that's something that Kemono Jihen most definitely isn't lacking. From the get-go, we gain this understanding that future characters will clearly have a lot of potential, just based on what we've already received with Kabane and Inugami. Shō Aimoto clearly has a talent for writing, as it shows in her ability to create an emotional attachment to these characters, Kabane especially, in such a short amount of time, and this only continues as the cast grows larger. I'd also quickly like to bring note to just how refreshing the main cast feels with how young they are, as opposed to the mid-teens to young adult range that you see more usually from anime lately. I honestly think the last time I've seen a shonen series with a cast this young was Part 1 Naruto, and that didn't exactly come out last week or anything. So it's definitely a different feel that I appreciate, and it's cool to imagine what these characters may grow to be like. Continuing on, I especially favor how Aimoto is able to make the narrative so simple yet enticing while not being too linear, as the world she's shaping offers plenty of possibilities and room for theorizing what it may change into. The title of the series itself, Kemono Jihen, roughly translates to Kemono Incidents, and based off the character Inugami's profession as a detective of the occult, I'm sure that by now you could have pieced together that the main focus of the show is how the immediate cast will wander from place to place, looking into these uncanny anomalies mainly caused by other Kemono. I think that taking this direction with the series may lead to it becoming something pretty unique, even among its now oversaturated categorization. This is mainly due to the fact that any series which doesn't present itself with a goal or endgame to work up to from the start typically has more freedom with where it chooses to go in the long run, and this series is no exception. And so regardless of what we go through, whether it's exploring a character and looking into their backstory, or tackling an entirely brand new situation, it seems much more relevant to the journey than any specific destination that things are leading up to, and all of it pieces together to form a pretty great experience. However, this type of structure can of course be good and bad. The few people that I know personally who've watched it definitely don't take offense to it, and as such I haven't seen nor do I know anyone who doesn't fancy the amount of freedom it has. But it's only natural for anyone who does prefer a more focused kind of story to not like how it may go off the rails a bit. Another thing is that the characters can take a while to build up and learn about, at least within the first season, which may be a negative for you you depending on if you're the type who likes things to progress more snappily. For me, I didn't feel as if the wait was too long, but it's just that for now, the majority of their development is held off, then comes full force all at one moment dedicated to them, as opposed to piece by piece over the course of the season. But aside from these small preferential problems, the series is fairly inoffensive and overall just a nice story to pick up and enjoy. You won't be getting anything groundbreaking with it, but it's not trying to be, and it has a good authentic feel to it for that. If you're more of a manga reader, then the art is really good, with really nothing to take away from its visuals, paneling, or anything else. And the pacing is pretty decent as well, albeit a bit slower than the anime for reasons I'll get into in a second. If you're going for the anime, then of course you stand to gain the additions of a really good soundtrack, great animation, sound design, and some very nice voice acting. And remember when I said it doesn't offer anything groundbreaking? Well, that was kind of a lie, because the ending and especially the opening themes are honestly some of the best and most underappreciated that came out that year, with the opening being performed by Daisuke Ono himself, the voice actor of Jotaro Kujo and Erwin Smith. Absolute bangers. The one thing I did take issue with is how the first few chapters were a little different in terms of sequencing, which is why the pacing seems a little slower at first for the manga, for me anyways, who's watched the anime first without the extra scenes and whatnot. I'm much more geared towards one-to-one adaptation, so I wasn't a huge fan of this, but at very least it does seem to be getting more similar to how the anime was as I continue to read on. But again, these differences don't take much away from the enjoyment of it all, and I'm excited to see where Aimoto will continue to take this series. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hopefully I've garnered your interest in this series, because I truly do believe that it deserves much more attention, especially with how hard it was shafted just because it was overshadowed by the titans of 2021. If we lived in some alternate universe where we hadn't gotten so much out of the winter season that year, I have no doubt that this would have caught the eyes of way more people. But hey, maybe that'll change sometime in the future. If you have seen this series, I'd love to know your thoughts on it, and if you haven't, I'd also love to know if you plan on watching it now, since you've seen this video. And of course, I appreciate all the support. But as always, this has been Tenta. Stay easy, guys.